Welcome back to The Mandatory. Remember, if you like the content that we're putting out, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, follow us on our social media channels at The Mandatory TKO. You'll see below the ways that you can connect with us and everyone that already has been rocking with us. Thank you so much. We do appreciate it. Lots of good content to come. We actually got a report earlier, Bryan, of some pretty big news that we're going to get to. Before we get to it, what I want to ask you is, did you do like any jokes for April Fools? Did you fool anybody?
No, I don't have the stomach for that shit anymore. Because I'm too anxious to like be joked on, like a severe joke or whatever. Like I would do that shit when I was a kid. Sure, when I was like 8, 12, whatever, you could like joke about the foulest shit. Now I don't want to be April Fools anymore. I want to be joked on, sure. Like I'll take jokes or whatever the case may be. I always say like if you and by the way, you can email the show at themandatoryshow@gmail.com for when we start doing mailbags. You email some funny shit, we'll put it on the show. I'll make sure that happens. But April Fools, I'm good. There's too much anxiety for that shit now.
Yeah, no, I feel you. You know what? The person that got me the worst on April Fool's, actually my mom, never have gotten her back. That lady is a prankster. But you know what? Someone said that there was an April Fool's joke that went on in boxing. It could have possibly been real news, but we're gonna get to that right now. So you know what? Let's roll with it, and we'll let you know what happened earlier this week. All right, so it was reported that Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. were going to have an undisputed bout that they came to terms. It would be on June 17th in Las Vegas, and it would be announced during the Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis fight. And then we got a tweet from Bud Crawford saying it's April Fool's. So, Bryan, are we going to get this fight? And do you think it's an April Fool's joke?
We ran a poll on this on our YouTube channel at TheMandatory. Subscribe, as it says on the bottom. And basically asking people just temperature checking the community. Do you think this is actually going to happen? Do you care that it's going to happen? Whatever the case may be. And a lot of people, I think 50% of well over 100 people said, we'll see. Some form of that. And that's basically where I am with this. Like, we're not even going to get into like a full breakdown of the fight because we don't know.
Yeah.
Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia is 2 weeks away as of when we're recording this. So maybe we'll see. But we've been hearing about Errol Spence potentially fighting in April, and then it was in May, and now this could happen. So like this would make sense as to why he hasn't fought yet, because by now you figure he would have done the Keith Thurman fight. At the very least, because that's something that's been potentially rumored in the works for a while. But as it pertains to Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence, I mean, I hope it happens now, because I don't want to see Terence Crawford versus Alexis Rocha in June and then Errol Spence versus Keith Thurman. I do actually want to see that fight, but I don't want to see it over Bud versus Spence. I don't want to see these guys take interim fights or stay busy fights and then fight each other down the line. Like, we're getting to the point, like, guys are going to be in their mid 30s. Terence Crawford already is. And it's like, come on, like, don't wait till it's too late, like we've seen happen in boxing before. And I hope that it's right, but I'm just not sure, because it seemed like it, and then it's a report, and we've sort of been near the finish line, Shantelle, with this before, reportedly, and now Terence Crawford is out here saying it's April, you fools, on his Twitter account. Not saying what he's referring to, but what else could it possibly be? So that's kind of where I'm at with this. Hopeful that it does go down, but I'm just very much in wait and see mode. At the prospect of watching the two best welterweights in the world go at it.
This has been a back and forth thing for a little while now, where I don't know if I believe it's going to go down, because clearly Bud Crawford tweeted it's April Fool's. So that makes me think that, yeah, they're still negotiating, which we already knew that these two were still negotiating some terms. That was actually reported. But to have Bud tweet that, it's like, Are you trying to April Fool me that the fight's not going to happen, but it is going to happen and you still want it to be a surprise? Like, I'm all confused here because it does also make sense to announce this fight after a huge fight. It does make sense, but at the same time, this has been so back and forth, and I don't actually know if it's going to happen because I do believe, and we've all kind of known this, is that Errol Spence and Keith Thurman are possibly set to fight if this Bud Crawford Spence fight doesn't go down. And my whole thing is, I don't mind that fight at all. I don't mind that fight at all because it's been a minute since we've seen Spence fight, anyways. And Keith Thurman is still a formidable opponent. Like, if we were to rank, and I think one day we will rank the welterweight division. But here's the thing, I heard a rumor, this is like obviously going off topic, but that Spence and Thurman weren't even supposed to fight at welterweight. Like, they're gonna have a catch weight or move up for that fight. So
I don't want that.
yeah. So
I don't
and
want that.
but
You have Errol Spence's 3 of the 4 main welterweight titles. Terence Crawford has the other one. I don't want to fucking see a catchweight fight. Like how, like, remember the rumor that, oh, Errol Spence is gonna fight Keith Thurman at 154 instead of defending all 3 titles. I don't want to see that shit. Granted, I want to see the fight. So like whatever.
make it at welterweight. But make it at welterweight.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Just
why are we
make
doing
one.
it at a catch weight?
Yeah, what are the titles for? And granted, this is a fight that transcends titles, but does it really if they're fighting for undisputed, as a matter of fact? So no, it doesn't. Yeah, I don't want to see that shit. And also the mechanics of this do make sense, right? Like, if Ring Magazine is on this, if this were to be announced as reported during Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, that would make sense given that Showtime would probably make the announcement because Terence Crawford isn't really with anybody right
Yeah.
now. It's kind of just out here lingering. Obviously not Eddie Heard, Oscar De La Hoya was like courting him at one point, trying to see if he could get him there. I don't want to see that because I feel like that brings us further away from an Errol Spence fight, not closer. Um, not to say that Terence Crawford should just sign with PBC and make it happen. I'm not sure if that's in his best interest, evidently. But I think that it does make sense because at the end of the day, if I had to guess, it probably is a Showtime pay-per-view or a Fox pay-per-view. Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford, no?
Yeah, I would think so. That's probably the easiest route. I don't really know what's going on with BLK Prime. Is he still going to be with BLK Prime?
I don't know if anybody is. Look, Adrian Broner's card got shot up in flames. And he is currently with Don King. Tevin Farmer and Mickey Bay tried to fight again. That was on a BLK Prime
That fight's
card.
never going to happen.
That didn't happen. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know what's happening with BLK Prime. I'm not counting on them to further Terence Crawford's career at this point. I think Terence Crawford's just sort of out here and presumably has options. And hopefully whatever option brings him closer to or making this fight happen, then fine. I'm with it. But
yeah, I mean, I think this would be the easiest route. And if there are reports of it, I think they're extremely close or they are close. And maybe Bud Crawford still wants it to be somewhat of an announcement. But at the same time, us fans, we've been waiting for a long time. The back and forth, we've been talking about this fight for years. We want this undisputed fight. And if we do get it, it is arguably the biggest fight of this generation, in my opinion. People are saying that for Gervonta, Tank Davis, and Ryan Garcia, but it's not. That's not the fight of the generation. It's a really big fight this year, but it doesn't compare to an undisputed welterweight match between two of the best, two of the kings in the welterweight division. So hopefully we get this fight. Hopefully those reports are for real. But if it doesn't happen, I'm not going to be surprised. I'm actually more positive, Bryan, that we'll get Spence and Thurman than I am about this fight. And then maybe I'm just far removed from it. Maybe I'm just like,
you're
man,
so jaded.
yeah, exactly, right? Because come on, man, Bud's getting older. And my whole thing is, I don't want it to ever be like how we saw Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. Because that was like 5 years after than when we should have gotten it. And that's how I felt like this fight was going at one point. So if we don't get it this year, I'm just going to think it's never going to happen until Bud is really old so Spence can beat him that way. But, you know what I mean? And it's a 50-50 fight. But I think they would probably, and I know we're not going to break this all down right now, but I think Spence would be the favorite.
I recall last year because there were odds up. Because remember, we got near the finish line and rumors about this happening in like October, November before uh, David Evanesian and BLK Prime came into the fold. But I think if I recall correctly, Terence Crawford was a very narrow favorite on FanDuel odds and DraftKings odds. It
had
was
the odds
close.
up.
Yeah, it was like minus 130, minus 120. That was when I was checking when we were still working there. Errol Spence, though, he was like a slight underdog, but it was damn near even. Terence Crawford, I
Yeah.
remember him being a slight favorite, which I think he will be when the odds go back up because stylistically, as a counter puncher, as a guy who can switch southpaw and probably will fight southpaw for a decent chunk of this fight, even though Errol Spence himself is a southpaw. Like, yeah, I think that he's probably going to go in as a slight favorite. Doesn't mean he's going to win. You know what I mean? But I think that's where the money's going to go initially.
Interesting. I would have figured, this is such a 50-50 fight. And when you talk to a lot of people, everyone kind of has their picks for it. I already have my pick for who's going to win that fight. But I feel like more people from what I understand, more people kind of lean to Spence from all the people I've talked to. And I'm just going to say that I'm leaning towards Bud. I'm just going to say it right here. You'll get my pick when we actually do the preview, if the fight ever happens. But I'm definitely leaning towards Bud. But every time I talk to people, they're leaning towards Spence. So not to give too much away, because we'll make our picks and we'll break down the fight. But Bryan, if you had to pick today between the two, who are you rolling with? You don't have to break it down or give me this crazy analysis.
I'm not going to. But I've always, like, my knee-jerk reaction is like Terence Crawford sort of ekes out a decision. The mechanics of how we actually get there sort of vary in my head because there's a bunch of different ways he can win. I also think Errol Spence could win this fight, but I thought, I like the way Terence Crawford handled Sean Porter versus how Errol Spence did.
I think that fight was a draw with Spence and Sean Porter, actually.
You think it was a draw?
Yeah, I think it was a draw.
One judge did have it for. I think one judge had it for Sean Porter.
It was close.
I remember it being
I don't think Sean
close.
Porter. I don't think Sean Porter won, but I had it as a draw.
Ironically, I think Sean Porter is probably the best win for both guys. In terms of the best guy that each guy has beaten. You would argue that Errol Spence beat a better version because Terence Crawford fought him after. But Terence Crawford also did a much better job and was the only guy that stopped him. Yeah, he was the only guy that stopped him.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hate that argument. Also, Bud's knocking out every guy that he fights.
Yeah.
So I think, we're not going to get into this too much, but my last point will be, if Spence was to win, I think he would do it by decision.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Terence Crawford could get hit. That's something that we've seen. And Errol Spence as a pressure fighter is the top 1% of the top 1%, of this generation in terms of just pressure fighting. So I think they're going to mix it up enough to where we're going to see some action. Probably not initially, right? Like we'll get a couple feel out rounds, but now we're getting into the analysis of the fight. I'm gonna pull the plug here.
I'm gonna say one more thing.
I just hope it happens.
No, I'm gonna say one more thing.
And I reserve the right to change my mind as far as who I'm picking, but I've been leaning Terence Crawford.
I just realized this. I think it would make more sense for Spence to fight Keith Thurman first and then fight Bud, and for Bud to have a tune-up fight, because it hasn't been a long time since Bud has fought, but it's been a long time since Spence has fought. And you got to remember, Spence was in that horrific car accident, then had, an issue with his eye as well. So he's gone through many things throughout this process. And it's mentally, where is Spence at this point? We know how great he is. He's one of the best boxers in the world. But at the same time, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, whoa, should he have a tune-up before Bud? So maybe I wouldn't be mad at that if we get it later on in the year. I just hope we get it this year. So
I hear you. And I think ultimately, if it does happen, you're probably right that it's probably later on down the line. I don't want to see no fucking tune-up. If we can get it in June, let's get it in June.
Yo, but is Keith Thurman a tune-up? That's a tough-ass fight.
No, I'm talking about not tune-up. I'm not calling Keith Thurman because Keith Thurman is not a tune-up. But what I'm saying is I don't want to see a prelude, just give me the album. You know what I'm saying? I don't want the single, just drop the album. Let's go. Let's see this fight. Yeah. And shit, the winner could defend against Keith Thurman. I'm totally for that because Keith Thurman, he hasn't fought in, I think, over a year at this point. So he's probably got to get in
He's
the ring
waiting,
sometime
man.
soon. Yeah.
He's literally waiting to find out what happens with Spence and Bud so he can fight Spence. That's all it really is. But
Kind
here
of
the
wish he took the Boots Ennis fight, but I don't think
he
that's
has
gonna
too much to
happen.
lose for that fight.
Yeah.
Keith Thurman has way too much to lose to
I,
fight
I would love
Ron
to see it though.
Ennis.
That's exactly. I think they're meant for each other at this point. Keith Thurman knocking off the potentially next great welterweight, and Boots Ennis potentially knocking off maybe the next great welterweight after the top two. You know what I mean? Like they would both be fighting for who's next in line. That would make a lot of sense. Virgil Ortiz probably had a claim for that against Stan Jonas, but he's hurt again. And that fight's not going to happen. So,
and I'm upset about that. I was probably most upset about that fight being called off. But here at the Mandatory, we want to know your thoughts. Do you think Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. are going to get into the ring in June? Do you think the fight's going to happen? Do you see Spence fighting maybe Keith Thurman before? And would you like to see a tune-up for either of these guys before they fight each other in the ring? Let us know. Drop some comments below. And before we get out of here, also make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and follow us on our social media channels if you like the content. We'll be back soon with some more betting coming up.